A young nursing student, just days away from graduation, was brutally killed, and now her family is demanding answers. Elizabeth Tami Odunsi, a 23-year-old with dreams of becoming a nurse, was allegedly stabbed dozens of times by her roommate Chester Grant after the two reportedly argued over their pet cats. But this story goes far beyond a roommate dispute. Newly uncovered information reveals that Grant has a criminal past, including prior convictions involving violence against women. Yet he was still allowed to live with Tami in a shared apartment. Tami reportedly tried to make it known that she did not feel safe in her own home. She called the police. She even scheduled a meeting with the landlord to express her fears, but allegedly that meeting was canceled. And the police, they gave Grant a warning, but left him in the home. Now, her family says all of this could have been prevented. They're suing the property management company for negligence, claiming the company failed to protect Tami by allowing a known offender to live with her. I'm Kennedi Walker, and I'll walk you through the troubling details behind the murder of Elizabeth Tami Odunsi and the growing legal fight over who should be held accountable. You're watching Law and Crime. Look, I know I say this all the time, but truly covering these stories day in and day out, you realize things are a bit crazy out there. That's why I'm so excited to tell you about a product we at Law and Crime created, the Law and Crime Safety Bracelet. This is a bracelet you can wear around your wrist or keep in your car or in your purse, and it includes multiple items that give you actual peace of mind. I'll show you what I mean. A whistle, which has a classic high pitch, which is great for drawing attention when it matters most. A compact flashlight that can be used to guide you in the dark or signal for assistance. And a seatbelt cutter you can use in case of a car emergency. And a handy utility knife for multiple uses. And these are just to name a few. So right now you can go to truecrimegoods.com and use promo code SAFETY15 for 15% off. That's promo code SAFETY15 for 15% off. Order your safety bracelet now and carry confidence everywhere you go. Elizabeth Odunsi, known online as Tami, was just days away from graduating nursing school. She was 23 years old, originally from the UK, and had moved to Houston, Texas to pursue her dream. She documented her journey online, offering study tips and motivation to others who wanted to join the healthcare field she loved so much. But before she could ever live out that dream, her life was violently taken.
We didn't just lose Tami, she was stolen from us.
According to court documents, Tami was allegedly stabbed to death in April by her roommate, 40-year-old Chester Grant, inside the apartment they shared. The two had reportedly been randomly paired by a housing company called For a Place to Live. The website states the company performs background checks when screening potential roommates. That task is outsourced to Safe Rent Solutions, which is also named in the lawsuit. But the family's attorneys say Grant had at least 2 prior domestic violence convictions in Washington state and argue he should have never been placed in a unit with a young woman living alone. A $65 million lawsuit filed by Tami's family claims Grant had become aggressive, arguing with her over their pet cats. At one point, he allegedly poured a liquid on her and slapped the phone from her hand. Tami called Houston police, but no arrest was made. Grant was only given a warning. Tami's parents claimed she scheduled a meeting with the housing company to express her concerns. That meeting was set, but just 2 hours before it was supposed to happen, it was allegedly canceled. Later that day, Tami completed her final clinical session before graduation and headed home. She was still on the phone with her parents when she walked through the door, and Grant allegedly confronted her. Her parents, who were still on the call, heard her scream, and then the call ended. They called a family friend nearby who rushed to the apartment and contacted police. Officers arrived to find Tami unconscious on the kitchen floor, covered in blood. Police say she had been stabbed more than 20 times. Grant attempted to take his own life but survived. He was arrested and charged with Tami's murder.
Tami didn't know anything about this young man.
Now her family wants answers and accountability.
It's unconscionable that this company would place this 40-year-old man with past criminal history, violent criminal history, with Tami, who was 23 years old.
The lawsuit also claims that the landlord, who owns more than 100 properties, prioritized profit over safety.
This landlord, if you look on HCAD, owns over 100 properties in the Third Ward area, in the Greater Houston area, and I think, as you can see, profit over safety. And so that's what we believe happened here.
The suit also points to that canceled meeting as a critical failure.
She did all the right things. She set up a meeting with the landlord. The landlord canceled the meeting.
Tami never did make it to graduation. Instead of receiving her nursing pin, it was her sister who walked across the stage in her honor. Now her family is committed to fighting for justice and pushing for change to prevent this from happening to someone else. And here to break down this story with me is criminal defense attorney Anthony Osso. Anthony, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Kennedy.
So let's jump right in. The family is suing for $65 million. Is that a typical number in a wrongful death housing case or more symbolic?
No, I think it's a realistic number. I think when you look at the nature of what happened in this case, and that you have a company involved in it, I think 65 is a number that you probably, it doesn't surprise me to see that number. And while that might not be the ultimate number if there's a settlement or trial, I don't think it's a surprise that we're seeing a large number in a case like this where a stabbing took place.
What kind of damages can be awarded in cases like this? I mean, financial, emotional, punitive? Could the trauma Tami's parents say they experienced, like literally hearing her final moments, factor into the case?
All kinds of all three that you just stated, certainly punitive. But I think, a lot of it will come from the trauma that they're going to, that the family will endure over time, and just direct economic damages involving her death. So all of the above.
From a legal standpoint, what duty of care did the housing company owe Tami?
So in this situation, it's a premise liability suit. So they've got a duty to her to keep the premise safe while she's using it. And so if they become aware of hazards or risks, they have to take action or take steps necessary to make that risk, or to remove that hazard or remove that risk. And ultimately, if they don't, and that hazard causes somebody an injury, then in that instance, they can be liable. So here, knowing that Mr. Grant had criminal history and placing her in an apartment with him is a known risk.
When you hear that a 23-year-old woman was paired with a 40-year-old man with the violent past, I mean, we just talked about it, what immediate legal red flags stand out to you?
Well, even before we get to the law, I just think, aside from the law, it's just absurd, right? I think that when you're doing roommate pairings, that you want to probably have people of the same gender or at least same age range placed together. So from my viewpoint, I lean more towards the criminal element of it, in that when you have an older male and young female, there's a lot of room for things to go bad, whether there's misinterpretations or things that intentionally occur, like we have in this case. It just leaves a lot of room for problems.
Right. And I mean, is it legally acceptable for a landlord to match two strangers without disclosing age or background?
Well, I think that it's not there's no statute that says you can't do that. However, if you're aware of if you're aware of a problem, if you're aware that somebody has extensive criminal history, and you place somebody that's much younger, much less capable of defending themselves in a household like that, then it can become, in my opinion, illegal.
And I guess where a lot of people are getting confused, we're hearing from, viewers online, according to the website, it says that the company does background checks. So if a company does perform background checks, how can they miss the fact that someone has prior domestic violence convictions?
Well, and we don't have those facts yet. I think that they should have been aware, or at least I think that they were aware of it, and maybe they overlooked it, or maybe they decided to turn the cheek in an effort to place people together and just keep moving forward with their business. And I think that's really where the civil lawsuit will weed out sort of the inefficiencies or omissions on behalf of that agency.
Now, this crime occurred in Texas, but his past, his past criminal behaviors that was in another state. So do most background checks include out-of-state convictions?
Yes, they do. So when you do a background check, it's not just convictions. You're able to see when people are arrested as well. And so an all-encompassing background check should have shown that he had charges in Washington. So it's not Texas specific just because you're doing a background check in Texas.
In a case like this, who holds more legal responsibility? Is it the landlord who approved the lease or the third-party screening company?
I think it's the landlord that approved the lease. I think that the screening company, probably did their job in that they. My understanding is that the screening company was supposed to do the background check and then provide the information to the landlord and the roommate pairing agency. And so I think the bigger problem and more of the fault falls on the actual property itself and the agency that matched the two, in that they had the information and chose to ignore it, or they should have known and didn't seek further information about it and put these two together. So I think they're the more culpable parties.
Could this case set a precedent for requiring more transparency in roommate pairings, especially when one person has a violent history?
Sure, I think that certainly a large lawsuit like this could put pressure on the legislature to enact statutes that would require roommate pairing agencies and landlords to go further as far as doing background checks and deciding whether or not they want to allow people to live together or even live in the apartments themselves.
Diving more just into Tami's complaints and missed warnings, when a tenant raises safety concerns to a landlord, is there a legal obligation to act? Because according to the lawsuit filed by her parents, they claim that they tried to set up a Zoom meeting with the landlord, and Tami's parents were also going to be on the call, but it was canceled 2 hours before. So what do you think about that?
I think there was a legal obligation to act. I think that if you have a tenant that has filed a report and you are aware that there's criminal history involved and you're seeing that party that has criminal history starting to act aggressive, I think you have the responsibility to move forward and do something about it. So I think the lawsuit has teeth, and I think what happened here is horrible.
How damaging is that, though, in the legal sense of a person having that in writing and the company just canceling the meeting?
Well, it goes to the knowledge element. And so the having that in writing goes to the knowledge element, and the cancellation of the meeting is just another instance of an omission by these companies that the plaintiff's attorneys can point to say, look, your actions are what caused her death in this case. And so it's a good fact for the plaintiff, and it's definitely not what you would want or how you'd want a business to operate with that kind of knowledge.
Tami also called police after an aggressive incident. Even though no arrest was made, could that still be used to prove that she feared for her safety?
Absolutely. It's definitely a fact. Whether it will come into trial, assuming that the civil case, and mind you, Mr. Grant's facing a murder charge in state court here in Houston as well. And so I imagine that case would play out before a civil case ever went to trial. But assuming that, and in the criminal context, that evidence certainly could come into play because the law on murder allows you to talk about the nature of the relationship between two parties involved. And so it's definitely relevant.
Well, let's just dive more into the criminal trial that may happen. We don't know if they're going to trial. They could do a plea, but how many years is he facing? How do you think the prosecution is going to try this case?
So he's facing a first-degree murder charge. So the punishment range in Texas carries a sentence of a minimum of 5 up to 99 years or life in prison. And so there's a lot at stake. I think that the prosecution, like you had mentioned, that prior instance where HPD reported, or where there was a report made to the Houston Police Department, I think that that's something that they'll play into to show that there's sort of a buildup of aggression by Grant towards Ms. Odunsi. And so I think they'll lean into that and go from there.
Of course, we're waiting on more information, but what do you think about the fact that police did leave? I mean, how often do we see cases where, a person calls police, they, allegedly say that they feel threatened, and the police, not to say they turn the other cheek, but no arrest was made.
Sure. You do see it, Kennedy, and it really just depends on whether there's probable cause to believe a crime took place. So if they had a verbal argument and no crime was ever committed, then there's no probable cause for them to make an arrest in that situation. So you do see it. I haven't seen that offense report, so I don't know specifically what happened that day. But assuming no law was broken, then the police can't arrest him.
Now, of course, hindsight is
Mm-hmm.
2020, but given just what we know now, if a person does feel uncomfortable, if they do, they've called the police, nothing's been done, but they're living with this person and they just don't know, what would you recommend that they do?
I think that they should try to find another place to live. I think that they should be vocal about it to other people that know them. It's unfortunate in this situation because she had come from the UK, and so I don't know what her connections were like in Houston. But certainly make a report and certainly try to find another place to go, especially like in her situation where she was with a 40-year-old man, probably larger than her, stronger than her. She probably didn't have the ability to defend herself. And so when you start to see those red flags, it's important to try to remove yourself from that situation. And it sounds like that's what she was trying to do here, and unfortunately wasn't able to do so.
Right. And regarding civil versus criminal responsibility, because, there's, like I said, there's two different cases that we're dealing with here. Can you break down the difference in legal strategy between the two?
Absolutely. So from a criminal perspective, it's solely focused on Mr. Grant and his intentionally causing the death of Miss Odunsi. And so from that point of view, it's just proving that he had the intent to cause her death by stabbing her with a knife. When looking in the plaintiff for the civil case, there is a filing against Mr. Grant, but I don't really think that's the focus of the plaintiff's case. The criminal case is about punishment for somebody that broke the law. The civil case is about, while it's kind of about punishment, it's more about making somebody whole financially for an economic loss that they've endured. And so the focus there is probably going to be going after the agencies that have deeper pockets and showing that while they may have not acted intentionally, that they acted negligently. They had a responsibility and a duty to somebody. They were aware of a risk. They didn't do anything to fix that risk. And ultimately, it was their failure to do so that caused the death of a person. And so that's the plaintiff's strategy.
How long does it take for a civil lawsuit like this to go to court or to be settled?
Years. I don't anticipate that we would see this in trial in 2025 or 2026. I think 2027 or 8 is the more likely. And even more so in a case like this, because you've got a corresponding murder charge, the criminal case is always going to take, in my experience, takes precedent. You're going to have prosecutors that aren't going to want to have witnesses testifying or giving depositions or things like that in a civil matter because they want to preserve the case for trial in state court, in state criminal court. And so I think that it'll be years before this case is probably resolved unless they come to a settlement in the meantime.
So essentially, until we figure out if Mr. Grant is found guilty or not guilty, the civil lawsuit probably won't be moving forward.
At least for a trial. Certainly these other plaintiffs, there's multiple defendants in the plaintiff's suit. And so it's not that they need a guilty or not guilty, essentially. But I don't see that case going to trial before the criminal case is resolved.
Does the fact that Mr. Grant allegedly tried to take his own life complicate the civil lawsuit?
It doesn't complicate the civil lawsuit as much as I think it could complicate, or I wouldn't use the word complicate, but it provides the defense mitigation in the criminal case in that now they can lean into, was he going through some sort of mental health crisis? I don't think insanity would be on the table. I think that's why it's really important to talk about those prior instances of aggression by Mr. Grant from the prosecution's perspective, but they could certainly use it to mitigate punishment or negotiate with the state in the criminal case.
And when you talk about prior incidents, are we referring to his criminal past? Will that be admitted, or is that inadmissible?
It's inadmissible unless the door is opened. So you can't use it would be called improper character evidence. You can't use prior instances of bad conduct to prove that somebody acted a certain way on a certain day. But for whatever reason, if Mr. Grant took the stand and said, "I'm a great guy, I would never do this, I've never done anything bad in my life," well, that could really open the door for the prosecution to say, "Well, how about all this stuff in Washington that we found out about? Or how about that prior call to Houston Police Department that was made against you?" So it just depends on how the trial goes.
If you were his attorney, how would you go about fighting this case?
It's hard to say this early on. I would want to collect all the evidence that the state has. I'd probably want to send him for a mental health evaluation. And then once I get a feel for what the prosecution strategy would be, then I would develop my defense from there. I think that because he was the last person on scene, the parents listening to the phone call, that's really strong evidence for the state, and arguing an identity defense is probably going to be difficult here. So I think we'd expect to see maybe self-defense, mutual combat, or mitigation through his mental health and things like that.
Could this be a plea deal, or do we expect this to go to trial?
It could certainly be a plea deal. And actually, most cases resolve through plea. Or through settlements. And so when cases go to trial, it is typically your murders or your sexual assaults where there's a lot of time on the table, but it could certainly resolve through a plea.
Now, Texas has the death penalty. Do we think that this could be a death penalty case?
So they do. This will not be a death penalty case. Death penalty in Texas is reserved for capital murder, and that's a specific, there's additional elements that need to be met by the prosecution in order to prove capital murder. Additionally, oftentimes the state doesn't choose to seek death. That's sort of that's reserved for specific, extremely serious cases. So in this instance, it's a single killing of a person. It's not a police officer. It wasn't multiple people, and so the charge won't be aggravated up to capital murder.
Well, this is a case that we will be following closely. Anthony, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks for having me, Kennedy.
Tammy's family made a GoFundMe to help bring her body from the United States to the UK. They've raised more than $100,000. For Law and Crime, I'm Kennedi Walker.